Hi listeners, Jason here. On behalf of Flourish DX, I'm excited to announce that the premier conference for psychological health and safety, PHSCon, is returning to Sydney on the 8th and 9th of September 2026. This will be the third year of the conference, and each year we've worked hard to make it even better while holding on to the strong community feel that makes PHSCon different. This year, we'll be exploring 4 key themes shaping the future of psychosocial safety: consultation, collaboration, culture, and compliance, through our usual mix of live podcast recordings, fireside chats, practical sessions, and industry case studies. We're also thrilled to welcome Dr. Will Fleming and Professor Maureen Dollard in person for 2 special live recordings of the Psych Health and Safety podcast. If you joined us previously, you'll know tickets moved quickly, so avoid the FOMO and secure your place now at phscon.com. I can't wait to see many of our regular listeners there. Now, on to this episode.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety podcast. My name is Jason and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How are you today, Joelle?
I'm okay. It's a Monday. I watched Back to the Future with Ronan yesterday.
Just the original?
Yep.
You didn't binge the whole...
No. We just do like one movie at a time over on the weekends.
Okay, yeah.
Our classic.
This is going to take you a decade to get through all the movies you have to at that rate.
Well, yeah, but they'll kind of advance as he gets older as well. So there's no need to cram them.
Yeah, and what was the reaction?
He really enjoyed it. He was definitely engaged in the sort of dramatic tension. Is he going to get there in time? Is he going to disappear from the photo? All of that kind of stuff. Sufficiently grossed out by his mum hitting on him.
Yeah, good. Yeah,
he
I was going to ask about
that.
Yeah. So, no, I'm glad. Look, I love time travel movies, and it's probably the best one to get started on.
And he's definitely keen now to watch the next one as well, because they, obviously, where we're going, we don't need any roads.
Yes.
Yeah, just grossly overestimated the capabilities of vehicle technology in the 2020s.
Yeah, what year was it that they travelled to in the future? Because we've already passed it, right?
2025.
It was recently we passed it.
Pretty recently, I think. I don't remember what year it was, but yes, it's passed now. And no flying cars, no rubbish powered fusion for vehicles.
Yeah, we'll check after you've watched the second movie and you can tell us what year they travelled to.
I will, yes. Watch this space, listeners.
Definitely don't Google it between now.
Don't Google it. You'll ruin it.
Yeah, the tension. But we had a quiz night the other night. That was fun.
Oh, yeah?
Do you remember what year Chernobyl was?
No.
No, I guessed it.
I really have just no room in my brain for those types of facts. Like, I know that events happened.
Yeah.
But, yeah, anything that's like, well, do I actually need to know that?
Yeah.
No, I can look it up if I need to, but mostly I don't need to know that kind of detail.
I used to be really, really good at being able to place names of actors and movies and songs and useless at it now. I've obviously got much more important information in my head.
Yeah. Yeah, those chunks of information are filed further back in the filing cabinets in the brain.
Yeah. But I got to say the quiz night was done really well. Lots of kind of musics and sound bites and all the rest, not just standard questions. And all of the ones you kind of felt, I should know this. I've been to one in particular. I remember just being stupidly hard. Like, what is the postcode for this ridiculous out of the way?
Oh, that's no fun for anyone.
No. It's like the winning team probably had 5 correct answers the whole night. That's crap.
Yeah.
So, and it was really close. Anyway, quiz night, good fun. I've got lots of more important information in my brain, though, I found, because I did not know a lot of the stuff I thought I would know.
And definitely because there's more important stuff in your brain now.
Yeah, either that or I just gotten really lazy.
Not that you didn't know it ever.
No, I did definitely know it.
Okay.
Some of the things.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, look, our guest is waiting.
Yes.
We might have some quiz questions for him during the session today.
Might we? I don't know. You wrote the agenda this time. So,
Yeah. And that was, I wrote the agenda before the quiz night. So there is no quiz questions in here. Sorry, guys.
disappointing.
Yeah. Look, let's introduce him.
Yes.
He is a psychologist and psychosocial safety professional leading strategies that protect employee health and strengthen organisational culture across Australia, New Zealand and Hong Kong, including the suicide prevention strategy, recognised with the 2024 Suicide Prevention Australia Best Practice in Workplace Life Award. He is Head of Culture and Psychosocial Safety at Bupa APAC. Welcome to the podcast, Mason Gismondi.
Thank you very much. Hello. Thanks for having me.
No, it's a pleasure, Mason, to have you on. You are not the first person from Bupa to be on our podcast. You are, in fact, the second, because we've obviously had your amazing colleague Chanel on before.
That would have been year one. Did we have Chanel on?
We had her on fairly early, yeah.
Yeah, I think about 2-3 years ago from memory.
Yeah, so she was an early adopter as a leader in health and safety for psychosocial, and it's great now that she's got you and the team doing some great work in this space, which we're going to be talking about today. Scott Burrell, Bennell, sorry, we've had. I think we did the conference with him, but not a podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an AIHS conference and we had him on there. And actually that's how the New Zealand government found out about the hierarchy of controls that Bupa uses and then decided to take it themselves.
Stole it, yeah.
Yeah.
They really did. They just took a snip and just popped it on their website, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, they did attribute
They gave
it
us
to
credit.
Bupa.
They gave us credit.
Yeah. So that was good of the team for them to do, but it's not always attributed back to Bupa, unfortunately, where it first came from. But yeah, you guys are obviously real leaders as a collective in terms of how you go about psychosocial safety. Yeah, so it's great to have you on again to talk about some of the latest advancements that you're making.
Yeah, we're looking very much forward to the discussion.
So before that, very important question. What are your favourite podcasts?
I was thinking about this question because I knew it was coming. Although before I answer that question, I've got to go back to something in your intro, Back to the Future 2, October 21st, 2015. That's the date. It just happened to be.
Ruined it.
It just happened to be my favorite movie when I was growing up. To the point where when I was 4 or 5, and I got made fun of all the time for this. There's photos everywhere. I would wear the full denim jeans with pockets turned out, just like Marty McFly, the denim shirt, and a little puffer vest as well. I was just a little Michael J. Fox on a skateboard rocking around.
Amazing. So I got the 5 right, but it was 15, not 25.
Yeah, that's right. So it did happen recently.
Not that recently.
In dog years.
Not that recently.
Yeah.
It passed pretty far.
Yeah. Everything's relative, right?
Everything's relative, that's right. As far as podcasts go, I will be hand on my heart and say that podcasts have never really been my thing. I usually will, I don't have a particular favorite podcast, but there's a couple I'll keep returning to, more for entertainment purposes and information purposes ever. So Smartless with like Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, Sean Hayes, that's a classic one that I keep coming back to. Anything by Mark Maron. Love him. He's the OG podcaster in the world. And recently, because it keeps popping up on every social media feed I own, Dish, the UK podcast, where all they do is talk about food. Because I think in another life I would have been a chef, and I can't help myself. I just gravitate towards the food. I just want to listen to them talk about food. It's very, very relaxing.
You do have a celebrity chef vibe about you, Mason, I reckon. So I think you could pull it off. Yeah.
You take that as a compliment or otherwise, however you want to take it.
I'm going to choose to take it as a compliment and then use it as a fallback, just in case this psych safety stuff doesn't work out. I think, celebrity chef. Just got to work on the celebrity piece first.
Yeah, not the chef. You're a good cook.
I'm a pretty decent cook. The Italian background is in me, so I can cook.
Nice.
Well, can you tell us about your professional career as it pertains to psychosocial safety and less about chefing?
No formal chef training, so that's a short conversation. Yeah, absolutely I can. So I actually started in occupational rehabilitation and not, say, the psychosocial safety field. So like many budding psychologists fresh out of uni are all looking for jobs, and occupational rehab is one of those industries that's always churning through roles and offering roles. So that was kind of where I first landed, and I worked for a provider in North Sydney. and was doing that occupational rehabilitation gig for a little while as a rehab consultant. And I started to specialize in psychological injuries and claims. In that space, it was largely New South Wales workers' comp. And about, 7, 8, 9 years ago, I moved from Sydney to Brisbane with the same company, but then started to expand the portfolio. Still in the psychological space, but started to look at CTP, life insurance. I started to work with DVA and ADF personnel as well to really kind of expand the skill set and the different breadth of psychological injuries and claims that people do experience. That, though, is pretty intense industry to work within. Occ rehab doesn't have the best retention rate across the board. I did start to move from rehab consulting to operations management for a time there, and I ended up looking after the South Queensland portfolio for that provider. And then about 5 years ago, actually bang on 5 years ago, it's my 5-year work anniversary with Bupa, I made the change from that provider to Bupa into the psychosocial safety space. And Jason, to your point, Chanel was leading the team at the time and very much one of those early adopters of psychosocial safety. I think I joined right around the time the Code of Practice in New South Wales was released and the ISO 45003 was released, because they were released pretty close together. The team at the time already had a psychosocial safety framework to work against, but it was merged with well-being elements quite a lot as well. It's a very small team, and it was only 4 of us to all of Australia and New Zealand at the time, which is about 20,000 people, so the ratio was a wee bit off, but we were doing our best. And as the conversation around psychosocial safety has just grown, so has our role, our portfolio, our remit, and I think it was towards the end of 2024, I moved into the head of psychosocial safety role, and we separated out psychosocial safety and wellbeing because the remits and portfolios of both are just too large to put under one umbrella at this point. And towards the end of last year, that portfolio has expanded again to include the culture portfolio, where it has traditionally sat under the organizational development team and now sits alongside psychosocial safety. And that's where we've been for the past 9-ish months.
It's an interesting adjustment to the org structure.
It certainly is, yeah.
Which we're going to explore in a later question, Joelle.
Okay.
If you read the agenda that I
did not
carefully curated.
How do you feel?
I'm pretty agile, so we can take this however you like. I'm not fussed about sticking to the set questions.
Let's go with the beautiful set questions that I wrote this time, Mason. I put a lot of effort into this. As Joelle does every other podcast.
Every other week that Jason doesn't read them first.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, you started to talk a little bit about the structure of Bupa. I think internationally Bupa is well-known, a well-known organisation. But maybe, just focusing on Bupa APAC, could you give us a bit of an understanding of the breadth and of the organisation, what your key focuses are, and then, what is the structure of your team? You started to touch on it a little bit there.
Yeah, absolutely. So most people, I think, recognise Bupa from probably the health insurance side of the business. But yeah, Bupa is quite expansive. There's a lot that comes out of that Bupa umbrella. So in Australia, we have our health insurance business, certainly, which most of us recognise us for. We also have our health services arm as well. So that will include your dental, optical and hearing. That'll include your support for ADF members. That'll include your Bupa medical visa services as well. That also fairly recently includes medical and mind place clinics, which is our mental health clinics as well. Moving over from health services, we also have our aged care businesses, which exist in Australia and New Zealand as well. So quite a large workforce sits within both of those businesses. We have 50-ish homes within Australia, and not quite as much in New Zealand. And then, of course, we have Hong Kong, where we have our health insurance and health services arm as well. So very similar to the Australia makeup there. But it's a very complex organisation, and with all those different operating services, we obviously have our functions in the background too. So your standard people, risk, technology functions. So across all 3 regions, we have about 23,000 people across the board. Again, quite a large portfolio for a tiny team. Because within my team there are 5 of us, with myself at the head of level. But then we have a lead for each of the core businesses. And we take a bit of a hybrid approach to how we structure the team. We do sit centrally as part of the central broader culture, wellbeing, safety team. But each one of our leads partners with each part of the business. The businesses themselves are so unique and so complex. They have their own individual risk profile, their own individual stakeholders, workforce makeups. It just requires that kind of more closer to the ground knowledge to be able to really guide risk management effectively within those groups. So we have a lead for each one of those, and I will typically support Hong Kong and our functions services while the rest of my team supports those. And that's the structure, effectively, yeah.
Yeah, look, I think there'd be many health and safety leaders in organisations around Australia who'd be really jealous of what Bupa has. I mean, many of them wouldn't even have one dedicated psychosocial safety person, right, let alone a complement like you do. But it makes sense given, like you say, how, you know, it is quite a large organisation, you're geographically dispersed, and there's quite different functions within the business as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we found it very necessary. When we were a smaller team, we didn't really have initially, when we were still developing, we didn't have that partnering model in place. It just kind of organically grew like that over time. It just became necessary, particularly as the conversation around psychosocial safety and well-being as well, to be fair, became so prominent and front of mind for our operational leaders. There was greater demand on our team as well. We moved from just providing advice to your executives, your senior leaders, to really being on the ground, supporting our operational leaders, responding to employee distress, responding to whatever culture, psychosocial safety risk might have been popping up within a particular team or site. And that just requires that more partnering approach to do effectively.
All right. Well, let's talk about the decision to move the culture portfolio into safety. What prompted that shift?
It was really in response to the kind of environment we found ourselves within. So one of the functions of my team is to respond to those operationals, help them on the ground, but as well as help guide the response from a lot of our SME teams, your people partnering teams or HR teams, your typical WHS professionals, your return to work injury management teams. One of the requests we kept coming to our team was around responding to culture issues within a team, particularly post-engagement survey. Engagement survey happens every 6 months, the results come out. The leaders who want to, say, improve their scores or dive a little bit deeper would reach out to either their HR professionals, the people partnering team, or to ourselves to understand their results a little bit further. And in those conversations, wherever we found that there might be a culture impact in some way, shape or form, the root cause of that was traditionally a psychosocial safety risk, whether it was leader support or whether it was interpersonal conflict that had tension that had cropped up in the past 6 months or so. It was impacting the culture and engagement of a particular team or site, and the action was more aligned to the psychosocial safety discipline versus the traditional kind of culture or organizational development discipline. So as we started guiding our leaders in those actions, we started to see shifts in engagement and culture positively. So it just started to make sense for the culture portfolio to be more closely aligned to the psychosocial safety. And since we've taken that portfolio, we've then used those psychosocial safety insights we've gathered through our risk assessment approach, through all that consultation, and start to add a little bit more depth to our engagement survey analytics so that we can really help give leaders clear actions at the outset rather than having them to reach out to us reactively.
Yeah, we've certainly seen with some clients a similar pattern where they will have kind of their engagement survey results. Maybe they've kind of been consistently low for a while and they don't really know what to do with them. And then by doing a psychosocial risk assessment and really exploring kind of the hazards and impacts, that's given them much more targeted insights around what to address, and they've actually seen kind of significant improvements in their engagement scores coming out of that psychosocial hazard kind of identification and solution cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very common story we saw. One of the examples that always comes to mind for me is a care home of ours in Melbourne, in Windsor. The general manager, to your point, Joelle, had a engagement survey that was becoming consistently low. And he wasn't really sure why it was happening because he was doing all the right things and taking all the right actions, and it appeared on the surface that the culture was quite positive as well. When he did have a bit of discussions with the team, workload kept coming up as a contributing factor. But again, he wasn't really too sure of the root cause. So similar to what you said there, Joelle, we also did our psychosocial risk assessment at the site. and we engaged in that one-on-one consultation process and conducted quite a lot of confidential interviews. And what we found was even the workload was a consequence of another psychosocial safety risk. We actually had a conflict that was brewing between a couple of our carers who were quite established, tenured individuals within the care home, and a few of our registered nurses who were quite fresh out of uni, had very clinically idealistic ways of doing things. And the just two ways of working were just clashing. And it had gotten to the point where there was quite a lot of conflict, tension. It wasn't, say, bullying, harassment behaviors, but it was getting to the point where they were avoiding each other, even to the point where they were saying, you care for your resident, I'll care for mine. But two residents don't require the same level of care. So quite immediately we had a role clarity and a workload issue. And then we saw ripple effects as well. We saw people who weren't involved in the conflict starting to call in sick because they didn't want to connect with those people who were arguing with each other. And so we had greater dependency on agency staff who don't know our residents as well as our Bupa people. And that again had a domino effect on the workload pressure as well. So we went in with that example and we provided the leader with some clear actions to address the conflict, which started to have that again domino effect of addressing the workload, the role clarity, and then the culture and engagement issue.
Yeah, we often see workload being kind of a knock-on effect from poor role clarity, either at the individual or at the team level.
Same. We see the same thing, and it's particularly from change as well. We see, because Bupa is such a large business, we're always putting forward new change initiatives. We simply just have to respond to the external environment we're in. But change initiatives, if not done well, or if done too fast, or if done concurrently, that can absolutely drive clarity issues. The clarity drives the workload, and so on and so forth.
So, Mason, I want to do a deeper dive into this whole culture under safety leadership, if you like, or within your structure. So culture is often driven by either a culture team, right, who's kind of like going, this is what we're striving for. This is kind of like the change management process to get there, or it's execs that are driving it as well. So you kind of touched on a little bit, but I'd like to know a bit more around how you're using the results of, like, rather than the traditional way that culture teams try and drive culture, how are you using the insights from your risk assessments to set the culture narrative? Yeah,
so that's just the starting point there is taking a different approach to how we analyze the engagement survey feedback. So we use People Pulse through Glint, as many companies do. And in that survey, you have your more quantitative measurement, your scores themselves, and then of course you have your comment section, all the qualitative feedback that people are likely to provide. A lot of the historical focus on Glint and these type of surveys focus on what, say, Glint would say your benchmarking should be. You know, what are these drivers that are likely to be the biggest producers of engagement, and focus on that. So for example, connection is a big one there. We've had quite a lot of action plans in the recent years around connection. Even though our connection score was quite high, it was still just beyond the Glint benchmark. So Glint would always recommend to us, keep focusing on connection. It's your number one driver of engagement. But if you deep dive into our comments, it's not what our people telling us was impacting engagement for them. It's change, it's workload, it's those role clarity, it's those more subtle risks that require attention. They're actually quite a connected group of individuals, and they attribute so much of that to their local leaders. Our manager inspiration scores are always extremely high. So we have a really good foundation to build on, but if we kept focusing on connection and manager inspiration, the things that we actually have nailed, we're missing the other things that are actually causing the disengagement. So bring that psychosocial safety lens into it. After we've done our APAC-wide risk assessment, we can add more depth to the narrative and justification about why we need to pivot away from just focusing on things like connection into the things that people are telling us are actually impacting their engagement. And it is tricky with engagement surveys because they're not risk assessments. They're not established and designed to look at those matters specifically, of those issues. So we have to be quite delicate in how we present that data to make sure that we have a clear justification in place. But that's where that link to that psychosocial safety risk assessment comes in.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, right? Because we do see a lot of organisations, particularly large ones like your own, right, that are very much wedded to having an engagement survey, which is fundamentally different to psychosocial risk assessment, but not being able to get given any more airtime in terms of the survey cadence that goes out to workers to ask psychosocial risk questions specifically.
Yeah, I think that's a key focus of ours at the moment. Our engagement survey is the most widely adopted survey across Bupa, not just APAC, but globally. It is our key consistent metric and understanding of how our people feel, but it is a lagging indicator by definition. It's asked every 6 months. I'm always interested in what's happening in the months in between our engagement survey, and I would always love a much more frequent way to understand the changing sentiment of our people so we can be more proactive in responding to their experience. But that's something that we're just working on in the background right now, mapping out what that could look like, because to do it for a team is easy. To do it for an organization at scale is very difficult to do. Survey fatigue is a real thing, and we just can't keep subjecting our people to constant surveys to understand how they feel. So we're always on the lookout for those kind of innovative ways to sense check and understand what's impacting our people.
Yeah, it's I do like the approach that you've taken, and we've definitely helped out clients before with looking at the particularly open text comments for within the engagement survey, right? Because I can give you so much information. But I found it was quite interesting what you were saying there regarding how, the survey was saying, hey, you should focus on connection, which is a protective factor. But when you deeper dove into the qualitative information, it was saying, workload, change were kind of some of the key drivers for how people were feeling.
Yeah, and I think it's important probably to nail the message in there, because we never tell our people or our leaders or our executive team we should not be doing connection. We're actually already doing it. It's not that we should stop doing it. We're already on the right track there. We don't just need to keep elevating it to a priority. That shouldn't be our key focus. The focus should be addressing what would be disengaging our people, because we're already doing the right things to engage our people. It's just right now, what is disengaging our people might be outweighing the protective factors. So if we can reduce the risks, our protective factors will just do the work that they're already doing.
Are your psychosocial safety investigations creating more harm than they prevent? When complaints involving bullying, sexual harassment, or other psychosocial hazards arise, poorly designed investigation processes can increase distress for complainants, respondents, and even investigators themselves. Do your processes leave people in limbo for months? Are HR and safety still running separate investigations that duplicate effort and increase the risk of re-traumatisation? And are you confident that your approach meets obligations under both WHS and industrial relations law? If your investigations approach needs an uplift, FlourishDX has launched a new accreditation program designed specifically for internal professionals. The Psychosocial Safety Investigation Method, or SIM, provides a practical, integrated framework for investigating psychosocial safety matters in a way that aligns HR and safety approaches while reducing the risk of further harm. You'll leave with practical tools, templates, and processes you can immediately take back into your organisation to strengthen your investigations capability. SIM is the new industry standard for psychosocial safety investigations. Register for an in-person or online accreditation course at flourishdx.com. Yeah, and that's very much aligned to what our research showed when we were doing our latest validation study, where we found that adding more protective factors without addressing the demands didn't actually have any benefit for people's mental well-being.
Yeah, and I think we see that as well, because Bupa, to your point earlier, we're so fortunate to have so many resources, because in addition to the psychosocial safety team, we also have the wellbeing team, who is very much focused on employee wellbeing and that the individual approach to health and all aspects of health. And we have our global wellbeing program in Viva. We provide medical benefits to our employees. We have dental vouchers, we have skin checks, we do all these different things to ensure the individual employee's well-being is catered for, so all those protective factors. But if we can't also manage any risks that might be impacting their health, then those protective factors won't be as impactful or as meaningful as we'd like them to be.
Yeah, and you'd have your organisational development teams and your injury management teams, so you cover off on the whole integrated approach for sure.
Yeah, the list goes on. Like I said, Bupa's pretty fortunate to have the resources we do.
I think a lot of the time people will think primarily about hazards like bullying and harassment as kind of the primary psychosocial issues in a team or a business. And I think, we're seeing regulators now going beyond that and looking at other types of psychosocial hazards that are not as, easy to evidence. Can you tell us about some of those, like some of those maybe less obvious or less behaviourally anchored hazards that your team is focusing on?
Yeah, absolutely. So we spent all of last year, after we fine-tuned our process, really running our businesses through our psychosocial risk assessment process. And every single business, every single team at every single level had very similar top 5 presenting risks, and workload, change, role clarity, job control were 4 out of the 5, and reward and recognition chopped and changed with a few others. But it was really that kind of the work design risks, if you like, were really coming through for our people. All the other risks, bullying, sexual harassment, were very firmly in the low range. They were very well managed and well controlled. There were hot spots here and there, but for the most part, weren't and aren't really of concern. Our control environment for those are quite mature. But workload, change management, those are things we hadn't spent a huge amount of time focusing on, certainly not at that organizational level, where our team, by the nature in which we work with the partnering model, we're quite good at responding to your local team-based risk hotspots and supporting that team to put interventions or controls in place, which is usually just reinforcing controls that are already existing. It's just making sure they're actually being used. But at an organizational level, at scale, we were missing some areas. So a lot of where our focus is right now is on workload, it's on change. Bupa is a big beast. Like I said, we have so much change coming down the pipeline, and we've been through so much change because we have quite a significant growth ambition. We started at the beginning of last year, doesn't finish until end of next year. We'll have another ambition after that. That does mean a lot of change. It does mean a lot of delivery, a lot of pressure for our teams as well. So protecting them in that journey is where a lot of our focus is at the moment. Workload and change are probably our 2 biggest ones if I had to narrow it down. And even then, change would probably be my biggest one, because the change itself is driving the workload and the workload pressure. To that point, it's actually not even so much volume of work, it's the pressure around the work and the pressure to deliver. So the change is a critical piece for us. We have, again, fortunate to have resources. We have a lot of governance teams inside Bupa, and we have a change team as well, a central change team that's currently mapping out a change governance framework, which we're working alongside them with to build in some of those psychosocial safety considerations. So right now, the focus is heavily on that to make sure that we're kind of building out psychosocial risk consultation through every step of the change journey, from your ideation, design, implementation, review phase, because it just hasn't been consistent in the past. Again, difficult to do at that system level for 23,000-ish employees, but we're getting there. And I guess the second risk probably on my mind is AI at the moment, which I think is just a hot topic of discussion. And I can dive a lot more into that, but I'm sure you probably have questions on the change piece. If there's anything you want to pick up on there, happy to dive into that.
Yeah, change management is an interesting one, and I think there's a few of these types of hazards in most organisations where it's a control, but it's also a potential source of the hazard as well, right? So you kind of need to have the change management systems there to control a lot of psychosocial hazards, but you also need to have the sort of hazard identification and control plan built into the change management process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the bigger challenge for us is not looking at change as a single initiative, but that really cumulative compounding impact of concurrent change. That's where it gets quite tricky. It's very difficult to have a bird's eye view of all change occurring within Bupa, let alone within a business as well, because they're all going through their own individual changes as businesses. And then to map that against the people impacted by those changes in different ways. So it's quite a complex system, and we still haven't reached a perfect solution, a perfect state, and it's something we're still exploring and still tackling with internal teams, as well as kind of branching out externally to understand what systems, tools, who's doing it well. I haven't seen anyone doing it amazingly well. Interested in both of yours opinions and insights if you've come across anyone doing it amazingly well, I'll happily borrow brilliance where I can.
Nothing comes to mind.
Yeah, no.
It's consistently a problem. I think, like, interesting there as well, right? Like, how much of that kind of organizational scanning is done in advance of a change actually being kind of approved and implemented to go, well, yeah, what are the other changes that are already impacting on kind of our affected identified groups? And yeah, like, what is the cumulative impact of adding this further change in there? Is it going to be in conflict with something that's already being rolled out? Like, you know, are we introducing additional kind of trade-offs for people and, you know, potentially sort of conflicting expectations or, you know, those types of things? Yeah, it is very complex.
Yeah, I don't think there's an expectation that anyone has a perfect answer, and I'm thinking more from a regulator perspective now. I don't think the regulators have also seen anyone doing it absolutely phenomenally well, but they are obviously focusing on change management as a risk. You know, University of Technology Sydney last year comes to mind, especially. But even then, that intervention lasted really a week, I think it was, before they lifted the prohibition notice. And I understand the controls that they were after, say, weren't as comprehensive as the ones that we're currently looking at exploring, but we're just trying to think further and further ahead. What else can we do to protect our people? And, you know, always on the lookout for that perfect tool-based system solution that can help do that. Just haven't come across it yet. I'm sure whoever builds it first will become very rich indeed when they figure it out.
I'm interested, Mason, in your thoughts regarding notification to the employer by the employee of hazards and incidents. Joelle and I just had a conversation with a customer this morning, and they were very concerned about the weaponization of psychosocial safety, particularly, you know, as they start to elevate visibility of that within their business, given that they're fairly new to this. Given that you're a few years down the track compared to most organisations, and Bupa, you know, invests a lot in the psychosocial safety team and whatnot. Is there any credibility to that concern that the more you talk about psychosocial safety, the more of an issue you're actually going to have from employees? And do you have an approach to help people to raise things in a constructive manner rather than, say, weaponising it as people are concerned about?
Yeah, there's definitely two things there. I would say, first of all, on the cuff, yes. I would say there's a rise in people weaponizing it. It hasn't been to an enormous scale, so it's not like a problem that we have to tackle with day in, day out. But I have noticed more cases over time that have become seemingly experts on psychosocial safety when they write their complaints. And I think this kind of correlates to the use of AI as well. So many times now when people are writing, say, speak-ups or raise their concerns or putting in claims, it's quite easy to just feed the information to AI and go, tell me what I should say. And they just kind of copy-paste what AI spits out, and they're quoting legislation and regulations. They're using terminology that I know that they're not familiar with, and so it does make the conversation a little bit more complicated. But that being said, it doesn't say dismiss the seriousness of the complaint when it comes through. We still take everyone with the same approach, and because we do have those resources, every one of those complaints still goes through that support mechanism, investigation mechanism if warranted. We have our employee relations, our people partnering, people connect, and legal teams that all kind of come together to understand what the root cause of the complaint is and whether we can work with the individual to resolve that complaint. And if not, of course, we have, you know, thoroughly investigate and provide the outcome back to the employee as well. So that's short answer. Yes, do see it rising. I think it's just a consequence of a lot of different factors, though, and I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. I would still say I see a lot less weaponization and a lot more people that just need help, and just have a hard time knowing how to articulate what help that they need. So that's probably where I would say a lot, and particularly considering the broader global environment we find ourselves in, I would say just distress as a whole is certainly on the rise, and the distress that people feel outside of work, they're bringing it more into work. They can't help it. The lines are very much blurred. There's no such thing as personal or professional stress. It's just stress. It just comes in, it will show up at workplaces, and we've supported our leaders quite closely in responding to that, whether it's work-related or non-work related, doesn't really matter. They just need to be supported. So those things still come through quite quickly. And on the kind of the systems side of things, how people report those issues, that is something we're still exploring, because our incident management system, it's very much designed, it's a legacy build, we're a large organization, we have a lot of those legacy systems, it's not an easy thing to shift over to anything newer. We have built out our system as much as possible to capture psychosocial safety incidents, but it's not as sophisticated as we'd like it to be. So actually recently, next month actually, we're launching an iteration of our Raise a Concern form, which was traditionally used for your more social risks, so bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, violence and aggression. We're building that out now to have a separate category around just work-related stress of any kind, and it's going to capture those work design risks, it's going to capture workload, job clarity, change management, because that's one of the biggest challenges we've faced in making the argument that, say, change management approaches need to be adjusted. It's just having the data to back it up that change could be causing harm. That's just not a data point that most orgs tend to capture.
Yeah. And do you have have you aligned, I guess, thinking internally yet with how you're going to respond to various psychosocial issues that are raised? So work design issues versus, say, your traditional bullying, sexual harassment incidents?
Yeah, we have quite a robust governance frameworks in place around all of these complaints and issues, whether issues come directly to our WHS team and are graded depending on severity, and so the escalation of those complaints depends on the severity level. We also have our ER and people partnering HR teams that respond to issues as well, and for those more work design psychosocial safety ones, they might come to our team, and again graded by severity. So we have employee distress frameworks, psychosocial safety incidents frameworks, all very much in place, governing a lot of that response, so that all these teams are working quite collaboratively and quite cohesively in line with each other. It's very rare that any team will do something in isolation without talking to another team for that additional layer of SME experience.
Yeah. And again, something that we don't always see either, particularly HR and health and safety working well together. But I guess, it's clearly one of the benefits that you guys have in terms of that close functional alignment, and even like you've done recently, moving culture under safety, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, every one of those teams I just mentioned, we're all part of the umbrella of people team. So we're already part of that one team approach, and it's simply a phone call to get our counterparts into the conversation and start to discuss how we move forward, how we support this employee, how we support that leader, or how we manage that risk.
So what would you say are the key skills a psychosocial risk lead needs to be successful in a business?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's a tricky question, I think that one is, because the idea of the psychosocial safety lead in itself is still a relatively new role. So I wouldn't think an established skill set is completely perfect yet, but where I have seen leads succeed is when they can, where it's possible, shift from that kind of individual to systems-based thinking wherever they can, because while it's incredibly critical to support the individual, it's always important to take that step back and understand, okay, what is the potential risk here? What's the system around that risk? How are we managing that control environment? And that's a hard pivot for a lot of people to take. If I talk about, say, psychologists coming into the psychosocial safety field, we're almost trained to respond to the individuals for the most part, less so look at the system around those individuals. And it's just taking a different way of thinking. That's a skill that gets developed over time, and it's one that I work with my team quite often. It's just always challenging, go beyond the individual case that's just come through. What else might be contributing to it? What's the environment, the context? What else might need to be addressed to actually support that individual? And all the other individuals who haven't spoken up but still might be experiencing harm, they just haven't reported it yet. So going a little bit beyond just that kind of individual context. I think another skill that you 100% would need would just kind of that risk literacy as well. I did not start my career by becoming a safety professional. but I certainly know a lot more about safety management systems, frameworks, regulations, legislation than I ever did before. And while was never my chosen field, the kind of intersection between safety and psychological literacy is really, really critical to understanding psychosocial safety more broadly. So I think that's a skill that just needs to be developed over time. And a lot of the leads within my team, and certainly with other orgs I've come across as well, they dive headfirst into the literature, the industry conversations, and just being really close to the ground to those is really important to get a little bit ahead of the emerging risks. Even recently, I saw a fair bit of literature come out around AI. Cannot remember the authors for the love of me, but it really nailed the emerging risk I've been voicing within Bupa for some time now, and I shared that with my team. And just being across that kind of academic component can help add depth to the conversations, arguments, business cases we put forward within Bupa as well. And probably key skill is just the communication piece. Our role as psychosocial safety or even broad WHS professionals, we have no authority over any team. We can't tell a team to do X. It's a lot of it's done through influence, stakeholder management and engagement. If we don't have those soft skills nailed, you find your impact might not be as high. We're quite lucky that we've done so much in the stakeholder management piece that Bupa really recognizes and values our team's contributions to the broader business. So it's not as challenging for us as it was in the early days, but when psychosocial safety was an emerging conversation, it wasn't as entrenched in day-to-day operations. It took that stakeholder and management communication piece to move things over the line, to justify business cases, to push forward for resources, all of that. And then to actually get actions happening on the ground. Or even just to attend site visits. No one wants someone coming around and poking in their operations, but if you have a good relationship and you make it clear you're there to help and add value to the business and add value to that leader, then they'll welcome you with open arms. So that stakeholder management piece is pretty critical, I think.
Yep, I would agree with all of that.
Yeah. I particularly like how you talk about getting back to the academic literature, right? And I guess, as psychologists, that's one of the things that we have in our toolkit, being a scientist practitioner, right? So we need to understand the science and how we apply it within an organisation.
Yeah, I agree. I think the added skill set then is probably translating the science and the academia into practical operational discussion, because that's where I sometimes find a disconnect between psych safety leads in the broader industry and how much impact they can make. It's because they know the technical, they know the theoretical, they know the academic, but moving it into the operational, it's a different language. If you're not talking practical terms, practical controls, operations, if you don't understand the commercial side of the business, you tend to fall a bit flatter in the discussion. It was very much need to be attuned to the rest of the business operations, workforce strategic planning, commercial values, P&Ls, all of those sort of things. If you can talk that language, understand it, you can you create a greater resonance with your operational leaders who, at the end of the day, they're the ones that will actually be implementing controls. So you really need to have that buy-in before you move anywhere.
Yeah, and like you say, being grounded in real the business realities. You got to be a pragmatist, right? You can't just be a pure, this is what the research said, we've got to do this intervention exactly as it's described. No, sometimes we're going to have to make some tweaks, but you know what? We're going to measure effectiveness over time and see if those tweaks actually worked, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Those discussions just need to be live, they need to be happening, and it always comes back, and I tell my team this as well, what value are we adding back to the business? Because if we can make that upfront, the buy-in is quite easy. And that's the single biggest hurdle, I think, in terms of any team's impact, is just make your buy-in and value up front. After that, it's all downhill from there. I'm actually interested in both of your thoughts as well. The skills that you've seen in successful organizations or teams or in that psychosocial safety landscape, anything outside of what I've mentioned that you think is probably critical to success?
Well, apart from being pragmatic, which I think is really important, you did also mention around health and safety literacy, because we do see, I do the jobs board myself every fortnight for our newsletter. I review all the jobs that are available and go, is this really a psychosocial safety role? because they can be called lots of different things. And very often they're looking for people who are, organizational psychologists, whether they're endorsed or have the master's degree, but not always looking for the health and safety background, or like whether that's through experience or through education. But I think that's just so important, because OrgSight will get you so far, but really you got to talk in health and safety language to get it across within the business.
Yeah, I agree. You need to be a chameleon of sorts. You need to be able to talk the psych. You need to be able to talk the legal to an extent. You need to be able to talk the WHS, the HR, the operational and commercial. If you can nail it on all those fronts, then you'll have quite a significant impact.
Yeah,
agree.
Your question.
Oh no, Mason asked you a question.
Right.
I asked you both. I'm keen on your thoughts too, Joel.
Giving you lead a team of people who specialise in this area.
Yeah, I do. Look, I don't know that I would come up with anything different than what's already been mentioned, though. So I think definitely that ability to influence without sort of formal authority is really important, right? As you were talking about there, Mason, that you do actually really need to be able to pull on the right threads for whichever sort of decision maker you're talking to around actually what's going to be important for them and what are their priorities. My priorities aren't important to them. I need to understand actually what's their pain that we're trying to solve, and how can I help them to solve their pain. And if I can communicate that in a way that makes sense to them, then we're much more likely to get some action and some movement there.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. You're almost building in some motivational interviewing in some of those conversations where you're just really trying to understand your stakeholder, what matters to them, what are those pain points, and if you can help in any way, you'll get the buy-in pretty quick. I agree with that 100%.
I guess alongside being pragmatic, something we've talked about with Wade Needham as well is, you might have a goal in mind, you want the business to be here, but like you say, Mason, in an organisation of your size, 20,000 people, multiple different business units, different countries that you're in, that's great to have that aspiration, but that might be a 10-year kind of venture. So it's not necessarily helpful to get the organisation focused so much on that they get demotivated because they're like, we're never going to get there. So helping people to work out what is the best next step for them versus where do you want to actually get them to eventually. You got to weigh up those two things together, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's probably another skill that the teams and other teams like ours need to have as well, is not just understanding your individual stakeholder need, but understanding the business priority and strategic priorities and what might be coming down the line. Because in a perfect world, sure, we'd have an incredibly mature control environment against every single one of our risks, and all holes would be plugged, and it'd be absolutely, sunshine and roses. But we really need to be attuned to what the business is likely to do and what risks are likely to come down the track for our people, and shift our priorities in line with the business priorities so that we are protecting our people from any potential risks that might crop up, while we continue to work on that continual improvement initiatives in the background. So I think that kind of strategic focus is very much necessary as well.
Yeah, nice. All right, well, there's a few things for people to work on maybe in the background if they want to get into this field.
Just a couple.
So, Mason, really appreciate the conversation so far, but there's a question we like to ask all our guests at this point in the conversation, and that is, what are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health?
It's a loaded question, isn't it? Yeah, look, I can't say I have, one or two absolute perfect thoughts, but just reflecting on, my own experience and observations, I would love for prevention to be the topic of discussion wherever possible. I think within Bupa, with other orgs that I've worked with and connected with as well through the different industry events, so much of it is first just understanding what the risks are, which they should. Risk assessments and things like that as absolutely should dominate the conversation, and that has its place. But then a lot of it needs to be, okay, what are we actually going to do about it now? How are we actually preventing harm? I think I'm very much active in turning the conversation away from risk assessing within Bupa to we know our risks. We get our risks. We don't need to go through another risk assessment. Let's focus on the controls now. Can we focus on the actions? The risk assessment, I think, gives a lot of people comfort because it's a clear process. It's a document process. They can have something physical and tangible to lean on. It's like, we've done X. But I think if you miss out on the control environment, you're not really protecting people from harm. You're just being more aware of your risks. So the prevention kind of conversation, I would love to happen more and more. And I see this quite a lot in, say, LinkedIn or in, say, conferences. So much of it is still on risk assessment. I think there's still a lot of employers and orgs that are a little bit behind the 8 ball when it comes to the conversation of psychosocial safety, and probably even haven't got a risk assessment yet. But I would love to have that entire industry workplace mental health conversation now move further into prevention and actually talk about the controls they've put in place. More active sharing of, this is what we've done to protect our people. This is the action we put in place, or this is the site that experienced this, and this is the control we put in place. The more case examples that I can see around controls, the more sharing of knowledge, it's just going to be better for every employer and organization as a whole. I think too much, like I said, lean into the comfort of a risk assessment because it's a practical action, but we need to probably lift up our game a little bit more broadly and just look about how we're actually protecting our people from harm. That's probably my number one thing at the moment. And I think separate to that would be as much as possible, increase acknowledgement that what happens outside of work does genuinely impact your people inside of work. I think too many employers still hold to a bit of a legacy attitude of, if it's not work-related, didn't happen at work, it's not really our problem. Bupa certainly doesn't take that approach at all. We have a very robust wellbeing program and look after the health of our people, but I still see elements of that. I think it's disappearing, but I'd love it to disappear faster. The world needs that kind of thinking to disappear faster, I think. There's too much impacting our people outside of work that can't be ignored.
Yeah. And look, I definitely remember having those conversations with leaders 15, 20 years ago when it came to fatigue. You know, people coming into work fatigued because, you know, they have some relationship difficulties, or they're all up all night playing computer games. Doesn't really matter. When they come to work, they're fatigued. That impacts on their work performance and their safety, particularly if they're driving big trucks or whatever. So what happens outside of work definitely impacts them inside of work. But just on your point around controls, I do feel that is where the conversation is starting to head. I think we're starting to see some organisations who maybe did their baseline risk assessment a year or two ago, but they're still getting workers' compensation claims, and maybe they're elevating, and they're like, oh, the risk assessment didn't do anything. Well, the risk assessment isn't the intervention.
Exactly right.
You have to have controls, and when you did your controls, did you just list everything that you already had in place, or did you actually develop new controls to actually deal with the risks that you identified?
Yeah, I agree. I've seen examples of that as well, where they do list all the controls they have in place, and they're almost trying to argue with the risk assessment. It's like, no, it's not a risk. We have all these controls. It's like, well, maybe they're not as effective as you thought that they are. It might be an opportunity to design some new controls with your people, since they're the ones also telling you that they're the ones experiencing harm. So yeah, I agree fully. I've seen a fair few examples of that over time.
Yeah, so I'm really hoping. I think that's hopefully a short to mid-term kind of hope for the future, Mason, where more people are focused on control and control effectiveness. Yeah.
All right, Mason, do you have any parting words of advice for listeners who want to work in the field of psych health and safety?
People who are not currently in the field and want to work in the field? Because that's different to what I would say. Yeah, if it was people already in the field and they're in the roles right now and they're having a hard time figuring out what's the next step, the same advice I give to absolutely everyone that I talk to is just talk to the people that you're supporting. At the end of the day, they'll be the ones that tell you what harm they're experiencing, where the stress is coming from. They'll tell you how it's impacting their day-to-day, what part of work is as they find challenging, and they'll also be great sources of inspiration for controls as well. So there's no substitute for just getting out there and talking to your people. I mean, I'm always a big fan of surveys because of the scale of the conversation a lot of the time, but even then, you know, my team are out on site all the time just to talk to people directly, have those confidential discussions. There's no substitute for that richness of information, experience, insight you get from those. So for anyone who's just started in the field, and finding their feet and figuring out where to go from here, your people will happily tell you where they need help. There's no issues there at all. Just talk to them and don't stand behind the screen or keep yourself removed. Just have the conversation. That will be the starting point.
Good advice, and I would add to that, if I may,
Absolutely.
ask them about the things at work that are bad or the things at work that are causing them stress, rather than what could we do to support your well-being, because you get a very
100%.
different answer from that question.
Absolutely. I think balance that conversation as well. Like, what is working well? I think too many people go into that conversation looking for the problems, but they might forget to acknowledge the protective factors, because not everything's doom and gloom. There are things that are working well. There's risks, sure, but have the balance of the conversation. Capitalize on your protective factors, build on them where appropriate, and then address your risks.
Well, Mason, it's been a fantastic conversation. It's really great having very knowledgeable practitioners out in the wild like yourself, and we are trying to feature more practitioners on the podcast this year. After looking back last year, we had heaps of academics, lots of doctors and PhDs. So it's good to have people who are actually applying, really good, robust approaches to psychosocial risk management in real world context. So thanks for coming on the podcast and sharing.
Not a problem at all. Happy to be here. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Mason. All right, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, we do record these over video when we have our guests on, and you can catch all the previous videos on the FlourishDX YouTube channel. We also take the clips from these conversations, the best of the best, and put them on the FlourishDX LinkedIn page. So if you've got a short attention span like myself, make sure you get onto LinkedIn and check out some of those clips. And while you're over on LinkedIn, if you want to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to myself, Joelle, or Mason. But that's it for today. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow FlourishDX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.